Hello, one and all, to another episode of Deep Lore. After a bit of an absence and a large number of changes in my life, I'm back. I'll keep the whole reunion speech short. Since I've been gone, we've managed to hit over 1,000 subscribers, which is insane. Thank you everyone, and if you are new here, don't be afraid to subscribe. We're a small, close-knit group and we would love to have you. Now I have hit 1,000, I have access to polls and various other community type posts, so interacting with you guys will be a lot easier, and I'm sure you would have seen that recently, me sending out different polls, because I love to hear what you guys think. Without any more delay, let's start descending the iceberg once again. Today, we're going to be talking about the world beyond our world. Not physically, but spiritually. Specifically, the idea of auras. Spirituality is a topic that everyone has an opinion on, but far less people can say that they've had an experience of what they believe. The spiritual world, as a genre, can encompass so many different beliefs, ideas, and sections. Those people that have had an experience are forever trying to chase the same feeling through rituals, psychics, tarot cards, or many other potentially dangerous ways. What if you could just throw on a pair of stylish goggles and see that same experience again? Okay, well, maybe not stylish. This concept was claimed to be invented in the very early 1900s and then suddenly became elusive and very hard to recreate. Firstly, let's begin by talking about an aura. What is it? It's a well-known term and often used in spiritual and New Age type circles, specifically in the West. It's typically described as some sort of coloured glow or haze that surrounds a human, animal, or object. The aura is said to show the spiritual or medical wellness of the being it surrounds. Some people also believe it links up with forces in your body, known as chakras. One of the main investigators into auras is also the man that designed the goggles we'll be talking about today, a scientist by the name of Walter John Kilner. He worked as a medical electrician in a hospital in London, and progressed up to the head of electrotherapy within the same hospital. In his spare time, he started to develop his idea of auras and the utilisation of them to make diagnoses easier. As this was in 1908, Kilner had to rely on making a physical item that could allow the user to see the aura, whereas present-day people mainly attempt to identify aura's presence using measuring implements such as voltage meters. He believed that some people were just naturally able to see auras without any kind of aid, and perhaps using his device, you could train the cones in the back of your eyes to naturally develop this skill. In 1911, Kilner published his work, titled The Human Atmosphere. In this book, he explains that after a few failed attempts to get some sort of physical proof of the aura, mainly in the form of using a large screen with a layer of phosphorescent sulfide of calcium, standing a participant in front of said screen and shining a bright light. After some time, once the light is turned off, there would be an outline on the screen of the participant's body with several other lines emanating outwards. This would glow a dark blood red colour just because of the chemicals used. However, this would only be temporary, and while he doesn't go into much detail in his report, there seemed to be a hitch that meant it just wasn't suitable for what Kilner desired. After going back to the drawing board, he considered the idea of using dyes, and after conducting trials with a collection of unnamed ones, he fixed himself upon one particular dye, known as spectroranine. Throughout this book, he refers to the dye as that name. However, in the footnotes, he explains that he and his friends decided it would be important to share the real name of the dye, lest it be lost to history, which is actually very lucky because if the chemical name of the dye was kept secret, there would be a good chance that it would have been lost when Kilner died. The real name was Dicyanin. The original pair of goggles that Kilner made can be seen on the screen now. But in summary, the Dicyanin was suspended between two thin panes of glass. This particular dye is said to be very effective at blocking out white light, which is said to allow the user to focus more deeply on the aura of another person. Theoretically, it should block out all other visible wavelengths. Alongside Dicyanin, there were two other glass panes with a solution of carmine between them, a much more common red dye which can still easily be bought. Kilner claims that the goggles worked far better than expected. He noted that getting the dyes suspended in between such thin panes of glass wasn't something he could get done in the UK or America and had to get specialist craftsmen from abroad. According to his report, after using the goggles regularly, he could start to see the aura without the use of them, claiming that the prolonged usage could train a normal person's eye cones to naturally block out some scale of white light and focus more on the ultraviolet radiation which the aura is composed of. As his report progresses, he describes the three sections of the aura that he discovered. Firstly, the etheric double, a dark band that follows the contours of the body, about 1/16 to 3/16 of an inch thick. Secondly, the inner aura, a thicker line that once again follows the contours of the body, but resides much further away from the body than the etheric double. And lastly, the outer aura, described as almost a cloud. It almost always has an undefined shape and no distinct edges. Instead, it seems to dissolve into the background. There may be rays, streams, or patches of colour and brightness that emanate from the outer aura. Very rarely, the outer aura is much more distinguished and prominent, which Kilner described as the ultra-outer aura. He included drawings of various participants throughout his trials and the aura that he saw emanating off them. In the latter half of the report, he focuses on variations in the shapes of auras when in the presence of disease. In one example, a 23-year-old epileptic man whose father and mother were first cousins, and of which the father was neurotic and depressed. Kilner notes that this man's aura is below average in width, more coarsely grained, and certain colours of the inner aura were reversed, compared to what he had seen in a healthy and quote-unquote normal person, indicating to Kilner that there may be a correlation between aura and health. Whether or not you could create a concise reference book to diagnose was another thing entirely, of which Kilner could not say in this report. Kilner published his report, which garnered interest from the layman, while the other scientists put it in the pseudoscience category. Kilner, who knew that his research was still very much in the early stages, set to work from 1911 onwards to create a stronger collection of research and perfect his Dicyanin goggles. By the time the second edition of his works was published, the First World War had kicked off. Remember when I said Kilner needed expert foreign craftsmen to create the glass panes? Turns out they were German. Any chance of him getting glass panes delivered from the only place he could find someone with the skill to do it was nil. On top of that, Dicyanin became harder to get hold of, as any deliveries into the country were instead allocated to supplies and munitions. Kilner discussed several other ways to make the goggles without the use of Dicyanin, but ultimately not much more progress was made by Kilner, as he died shortly after the war began in 1920. Every website or source that talks about Dicyanin all seem to have copy and pasted the same story for the conspiracy. Essentially, shortly after Kilner died, Dicyanin eventually started to come back, and people were free to use and buy as much of it as they want. It was a dye after all. Then, in the 1940s, after people were trying to make these goggles, the government felt threatened in some way and outright banned the dye. The assumption is that it was done to cover up or stifle the research of the astral realm and to keep the general population in the dark about auras and other spiritual experiences. It's said that there was a brief time back in 2010 that Dicyanin was available for the public, but this was stopped pretty quickly and put back on the ban list. All the websites seem to include the same anecdote that Dicyanin is not physically dangerous, but one of the author's friends, who is a scientist with a government clearance to purchase LSD, cocaine, and heroin for scientific testing, got his order of Dicyanin refused as his clearance level wasn't high enough. At present, it would seem, according to these sources, that Dicyanin is still very much illegal and is under high restrictions, but we'll get back to that in a moment. It does seem that you can still buy similar goggles that are built to resemble, and I assume recreate, the ability to see an aura. There are plenty on eBay, but to no one's surprise, they seem cheap, bootleg, and I'm sure wouldn't work at all. There is a Russian website that seems to focus on selling these goggles, but the website itself seems a bit outdated. If you're a risky man, you can see if it gets delivered for the low price of about 8,900 rubles, which is about $120. If you speak to anyone who has done research into these goggles, the name PranaView keeps coming up as a more well-known and generally more trusted brand for these goggles. I've included a video of the view that the camera sees when recorded for a pair of these goggles. The same channel that this video came from also posted a more recent video in which he shows the original packaging alongside a close-up view of the goggles themselves, which I'm showing in the background now. All his links are in the description if you want to see it better. He got many comments asking for a chance to buy one of their own pairs of PranaView goggles, to which a year later he responded that the guy he ordered from, the inventor of PranaView, had disappeared into the ether, and he has no idea if he's dead, alive, or incognito. Regardless, this channel swears by them and states that he himself has seen auras. Alongside, when he puts his hands together, he can see flakes and charges of energy going from fingertip to fingertip. I'm also going to leave another link in the description of a Russian guy who might also have a pair and seems like he's taken a recording through the lens. Don't expect anything eventful in these videos though, as the goggles are meant to actually change your eye cones, or at the very least adjust them. You'll see the colour through the camera, but it would be impossible to see anything aura related. So, firstly, Dicyanin, as Kilner writes it, doesn't seem to actually exist. Alongside a post from 2019, with some of my own research, it's highly likely that Kilner got his chemical, Dicyanin, confused with another chemical, Dicyanin, or Dicyanin A, a variation of Dicyanin. A very small difference, but his version got so popular in the spirituality crowd that if you want information on the goggles, use his word, Dicyanin, but if you want information on the science of the actual chemical, which I'm pretty sure he meant, use one of the other two. There was a book shortly released after Kilner's report that focused on the use of Dicyanin, but called it Dicyanin. So it seems that Kilner, incorrectly writing it, caught on quickly. This is further proven by a paper published in 1920 that describes how Dicyanin A, the variant chemical, is used as a dye, much like Kilner said Dicyanin was. Next, is Dicyanin A under regulation, and banned for purchase other than from people with the highest clearance? As far as I can see, not at all. Granted, it's not something that can be easily bought online, but neither are most chemicals. The safety sheet that expresses the dangers and warnings of chemicals doesn't indicate anything particularly dangerous with Dicyanin A, and searches online doesn't return any information about it being restricted. In fact, you know the paper from 1920 that we just spoke about that says it can be used as a dye, also gives instructions on how to make Dicyanin A. Of course, I don't recommend doing that stuff on your own at all. It's just some basic chemicals like acetone and a few others. Ultimately, it seems like Dicyanin, or Dicyanin, or Dicyanin A, whatever you want to call it, just doesn't hold up to some research. Now, I want to highlight something. I can pretty strongly say that the details of Dicyanin, or Dicyanin, being some banned substance because the government doesn't want you to get access to auras, is a work of fiction. It seems like it was shared around too many times and eventually became exaggerated. But that doesn't mean I am commenting on the existence of auras themselves. That is not the intention of this video. When Kilner's research came out, scientists did discredit him and stated that the aura they saw was merely an optical illusion or caused by wanting to see something. Perhaps. Maybe Kilner could actually see something using Dicyanin. Personally, I don't believe in auras, and this Dicyanin debate just seems like a thinly veiled attempt to make it seem more real. After all, if the government had to cover it up, then Kilner must have been onto something, right? Ultimately, people are genuinely convinced that they can see something when they use the PranaView goggles. I mean, look at the video, look at the links I'm going to put in the description. Either they're so sure it's real that they trick themselves into seeing it, a mere optical illusion, or maybe an actual aura. I don't know, but hopefully now people can get past the falsehood of the government trying to cover up Dicyanin, and maybe start to build some of their own goggles and find out if there's any substantial evidence behind whether the concept behind the goggles actually works. I would definitely be interested to seeing more videos of people using them. So that pretty much rounds up this conspiracy. I didn't make this video in an attempt to talk about auras specifically. That might be another video, but it was talking about the conspiracy of the government covering up Dicyanin, or Dicyanin, whatever. And I truly hope that you've learnt something in this video today. Thank you for watching this episode of Deep Lore. Hopefully, it's left you wanting to view more content. Please leave a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you haven't done so yet. I would appreciate it if you could share it with your friends. After all, why leave the comfort of the VCR when we're only at the tip of the iceberg? There are still plenty more video cassettes left to watch.